give the demonstration for the course Integrated Design Project Practical, course code UECC 017 for third year BEC students, 6th semester. List of experiments: amplitude modulation and demodulation, frequency modulation and demodulation, pulse modulation, pulse amplitude modulation, pulse width modulation, pulse position modulation, pulse code modulation. Before going to the experiments, what is the need for modulation? In modulation, a message signal which contains the information is used to control the parameters of the carrier signal so as to impress the information onto the carrier. The main important aspect of modulation. It is defined as a process of changing the characteristics of the carrier signal in accordance with the message signal. Modulation is a circuit which is used to perform the modulation process in which the characteristics of the carrier signal is varied in accordance with the message signal. The message signal is also called as a modulating signal or a baseband signal or an input signal. For the modulation, a modulator with respect to the input signal, that is modulating signal, and the carrier signal is given to the modulator, and the output is called as the modulated signal or the output signal. What is the need for modulation? It is required for multiplexing, narrow banding, to overcome the equipment limitations, practicability of antenna height, modulation for frequency assignment, modulation to reduce noise and interference. What is demodulation? Demodulation is a reverse process to recover the message signal M of t at the receiver side. Classification. Types of modulation can be classified with respect to two categories. One, continuous wave modulation, pulse digital modulation. Further classification of continuous wave modulation, amplitude modulation, angular modulation. Pulse digital modulation is further classified into two types, digital modulation and analog modulation. In further, digital modulation is classified with respect to pulse code modulation, pulse amplitude modulation and pulse duration modulation. Now coming to the first experiment, amplitude modulation. What is amplitude modulation? Amplitude modulation is the oldest and the simplest form of modulation. It is defined as a process of changing the characteristics of the carrier signal, that is the high frequency, in accordance with the message signal. If M of t is the message signal and C of t is the carrier signal, the message signal or the low frequency signal or the modulating signal is represented as the given equation. V or M of t is equal to Vm sin omega mt. Carrier signal can be represented as Vc of t is equal to Vc sin omega ct, where Vm is the amplitude of the message signal and Vc is the amplitude of the carrier signal. Therefore, amplitude modulated signal can be represented as Vam of t is equal to Vc plus Vm of t. Vam is equal to Vc plus Vm of t can be written as Vm sin omega mt. Aim of the experiment: to study the amplitude modulation and demodulation using VCT03 and calculating the modulation index for various modulating voltages. Apparatus required: VCT03 kit, CRO 30 MHz, patch cards, power cords, CRO probes. Procedure: the connections are made with respect to the circuit diagram. The power supply is given to the collector of the transistor. The carrier signal Vc at 1 MHz and 2 Vpp is given to the base of the amplifier. This is the trainer module. VCP03, manufactured by VI Microsystems. Here you have three sections: signal generators, modulator 1 and modulator 2. For the signal generation, the connection has to be given with respect to P1 is connected to from P1 is connected to P5, P9 is connected to P3, P1 is connected to P13, P2 is connected to P114, and from the modulator to P15 is connected to CRO, and P16 is connected to another channel of the CRO. Therefore, the input signal, we have to choose any one of the amplitude modulator. Either we can choose, you have two sections, either we can choose diode or a transistor output waveform. The connected modulated signal at the pin P7 and P8 or the pin P15 or P16 to the demodulator input of the envelope demodulator. For the diode modulator, we have to connect CRO channel 1 to the modulating signal test points. After giving the connection,
this call is now being recorded.
this is the trainer kit module for amplitude modulation and demodulation. Here, this model is VCT03 VI Microsystems. It has got three sections: signal generator section, modulator 1 and modulator 2. For modulation, we will be concentrating with modulator 2, the signal generator. For the demodulation, this part will be concentrated. For amplitude modulation, from the message signal has to be given from P1 to R5, that is P13, from P13 to P14, from P16 to P15, and from P5 it has to be given to the channel 1. Channel 1 will be the input signal. Channel 1 will be the input signal, and channel 2 will be the modulated output, which is amplitude modulation. From this display, we can identify the first channel is the input signal and the second channel is the modulated output. That is, we can easily identify that the signal is varied in accordance with the amplitude. We can tabulate it. First, modulating signal, the amplitude in voltage it has to be noted, and the time period. Similarly, for the modulated signal, the amplitude and the time period has to be noted. This output is for the modulated signal. Now we will see for demodulation. For the demodulation, the knob has to be connected from D5 to P16. P16. P16 to P18. From P17 to P15. And channel 1 is the input. Channel 2 is the demodulated output. This is the M of t, and this is Y of t. Therefore, for the tabulation, demodulated signal, amplitude and the time period can be noted down. Thus, from this experiment, we have analyzed the amplitude modulated signal, and from this we can calculate the modulation index by using the formula Vmax minus Vmin divided by Vmax plus Vmin into 100, where Vmax is the maximum peak amplitude, Vmin is the minimum peak amplitude, and we can plot the graph for the modulating input and the demodulated output. VCT 03.
This call is now being recorded.
Amplitude modulation and demodulation trainer kit. Here, the input pin from the signal generator is connected to P13. From P14, it has to be connected to P2. From the modulator to the pin, the knob has to be connected to P16. From the demodulation knob, from D5, it has to be connected to P18. From P19 has to be connected to P20. The first channel is the input signal. The second channel is the modulated output. Therefore, from this we can analyze that the input signal it is of 4 volts, and the modulated amplitude modulated signal is obtained in this channel. Okay, this channel. Okay. This is the modulated output. As per the tabulation, signal, modulating signal, amplitude 20 volts, and the time period is 1.4 milliseconds. The carrier signal 20 volts, and the time period is 1.4 milliseconds. And the modulated signal, what we have obtained is 8 volts and 1.4 milliseconds.